Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled a kingdom. He had a minister who was very clever. He respected scholars very much. He often invited foreign scholars to his court. One day, a great and famous scholar from the neighboring kingdom arrived on invitation. He stayed in the royal guest house. The next morning, the royal guards brought the scholar to the court. He bowed before the king. The king smiled.
I had heard about you and wanted to meet you.
The scholar replied,
It's an honor for me, Your Majesty.
The minister stepped forward and offered him a seat. After some talking, the scholar said,
I wish to ask some questions of your scholars.
The king nodded.
You may. First, I will inform my scholars.
The scholar agreed. Soon after, the court session ended. That evening, the king was walking in his royal garden with the minister.
Have you informed the scholars?
The minister nodded.
Yes, Your Majesty.
The king cleared his throat.
Good. But the scholars' questions must be answered well.
The minister said,
I understand, Your Majesty. If needed, I will answer them myself.
The next morning, the court began. The king said,
You may ask your questions.
The scholar stood up.
First question. What has no shape, but fills everything?
The scholars remained silent. The scholar asked again.
What moves without legs and never rests?
No one could give the answer. His last question was,
What can rise but never fall?
The scholars remained silent. Then, the minister stood up and bowed.
Your Majesty, I will answer.
The king nodded. The minister smiled.
Air has no shape but fills everything. The wind moves without legs and never rests. A person's age rises but never falls.
The court applauded. The scholar stood up and bowed.
Your minister is truly a gem. He has answered my questions wisely. I am truly impressed.
The king smiled and then honored the scholar with valuable gifts as a token of respect. The next day, the scholar departed for his kingdom. After reaching his kingdom, the scholar reached his home and rested for a day. The next evening, he went to the palace. The king welcomed him warmly. Soon, the royal servants brought refreshments. The king asked,
How was your journey?
The scholar smiled.
It was wonderful. The king there is wise and loves knowledge. but his minister impressed me the most.
Oh,
The king raised an eyebrow.
why?
No one could answer my questions, but his minister answered them with ease.
The king nodded, smiling. That night, the king thought,
I want to see him. But how?
he didn't want to meet him as a king. Suddenly, he smirked.
I know how.
The next morning, he wore a common villager's dress. He put on a wig and a fake beard. Then, he looked in the mirror and smiled. After this, he stepped out of his room and went to the stable. The king rode his black horse and headed toward the neighboring kingdom. As he passed a village, he saw a man limping. He stopped and jumped down.
Are you all right?
The man said,
I stumbled and hurt my leg.
Where are you going?
the king asked.
To the court.
The man replied,
Come. Sit with me.
the king offered. The man sat on the horse, and they rode to the court. As they arrived, the man suddenly said,
Now get off my horse.
The king was surprised.
But this is my horse.
The man shouted.
How dare you take my horse?
Then, he cried out.
Help! Help!
The guards rushed over.
What happened?
One of them asked. The man said,
I brought him here on my horse. But now he's trying to take it.
The king shook his head.
No. This is my horse.
The guard said.
Call the minister.
Soon, the minister arrived. He ordered the horse to be taken to the stable. The man shouted.
Help! Please! This man is taking my horse.
The king frowned.
No. In fact, I am a trader of neighbor kingdom. I was passing by when I saw this man limping. So I offered him a ride.
The man suddenly started walking normally. He said,
Your Majesty, you can see I'm perfectly fine.
The king's eyes narrowed.
Oh, he was only pretending to be hurt.
The king turned to the minister.
Your Majesty, he is a liar.
The minister said.
Keep quiet.
Then, he turned to the man.
Now, go and take your horse.
The man hurried to the stable but hesitated, looking around. He couldn't recognize the horse. In the stable, many black horses stood together. They all looked the same. After a while, he returned and said,
Your Majesty, the guards must have taken my horse away.
The minister then ordered the king.
You. Go and take your horse.
The king nodded and went to the stable. After a while, he returned with his black horse. The minister turned to the man and shouted,
Liar! That is not your horse.
He glared.
Now leave, or I will throw you in prison.
The man's face turned pale. Without another word, he quickly ran away. The minister smiled and said,
You can stay here.
but the king shook his head.
No. I am going back to my kingdom.
He then rode away, thinking,
I just wanted to see you, Minister. That was all I wished for.